Major support for these broadcasts is provided by Bank of America Merrill Lynch and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, M&T Bank. Additional support is provided by AVR Realty Company, LLC, All Nation Renovation, Bingham McCutcheon, LLP, Briarwood Organization, Bruce Mosler, Capital One Bank, Cassidy Turley, C.B. Richard Ellis, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, Chelsea Lighting, Cushman and Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, DDG Partners, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Friedman LLP, Accountants and Advisors, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns and Gian Tomasi, Investors Bank, Jack Jaffa and Associates, Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, Corman Communities, Madison Realty Capital, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Site Comply, Sterling and Sterling, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, the Witkoff Group, Urban American, Ackman Ziff Real Estate, Eastern Consolidated, Goldman Properties, the Moynihan Group, Muss Development, RAL Development Services, the Spandrel Group, LLC, Triangle Equities.
They call it Queens West. They call it the Meatpacking District. They call it Lower Manhattan. There are places all over the city that this visionary guy came into and created neighborhoods. Today, I'm very lucky to have Tom Elghanayan, who is the chairman of TF Cornerstone. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
So let's go back to the history of the Elghanayans. I mean, the Persians in Iran, you're saying your family comes back how many years? 300-400?
At least. My father said that we were Jews taken by Cyrus the Great, the Persian king, and this is like 300 BC, from Jerusalem and transplanted to his capital in Isfahan, as was his custom. When he conquered a country, he would take back people to his capital, you know, writers, artists, craftsmen, things like that. So there's always been a Jewish community in Iran for thousands of years.
Now you said to me your grandfather was very pious and had a very small family, 11?
Yes, he had 11 children.
11 children, 7 boys and 4
girls.
4 girls. And your father, he was a very intelligent person, he went to the Alliance
Francaise.
And tell me about that.
He was the 4th son, worked in my grandfather's tailor shop, and what the Alliance Francaise does and still does throughout the world, they have schools promoting French culture and education, and they take the brightest kids and put them in their school and educate them. And he was lucky, he was fortunate to be in this alliance. So he was educated. He was the only person in his family who was educated.
Now, but via that education, he also met the Shah.
Yes, because after the alliance, he went to military academy in Iran, the equivalent of our West Point. And he happens to be the same age as the Shah, and the Shah was at the military academy at the same time. In fact, my father was an officer in the Persian army and fought in World War II on horseback.
Really? So now what happens is, you said your father was a true entrepreneur.
Yes.
We'll get to that in a second. And he came to America quite a bit. You were born in Iran.
Yes.
And he comes to America, And I love the story that he's driving in a car and there are stop sign, there are lights. What was that about?
Well, when he arrived in this country, he was here on a business trip, and he was coming in from the airport in a taxi cab, and the taxi cab, you know, whenever there was a red light, he stopped. And my father, he tells a story. He said, "This must be an amazing country where people follow the law, because in Iran this would be unheard of. You know, people, you know, they would just go through lights if they could."
Now, your dad, you were born in Iran. You come over when you're 4 years of age. Your brother Henry was what, 4 years older than you?
5 years.
5 years older. But your dad was truly an industrialist. He was building plants. He was an importer, an exporter. He was everything. And you even told me that the Shah basically wanted to Americanize the people, and your father would bring in clothing that the Salvation Army sold.
Yeah, well, the Shah was on a westernization tear, and actually decreed that people had to wear Western clothes. So at that time, this was right after the war, my father was an importer, so he would import boatloads of used clothes, used American clothes, to Iran and sell them.
So you're 4, Henry's 9 at this time, and your father decides to move the family to New York. And how do you end up in Forest Hills?
He ended up in Forest Hills because my uncle, his oldest brother, had been to America before and told him Forest Hills was a good place, and my uncle ended up buying a house in Forest Hills also. Also, Forest Hills, where they lived, Forest Hills Gardens, looks sort of like a suburban Tehran community. You know, it's all single-family homes, winding streets, a lot of vegetation. It appeals to that mentality. As it turns out, our family was the first families to live in the gardens, and subsequently many Iranians moved into the Forest Hills Gardens.
You go to public school in Forest Hills, and then you go to boarding school.
Yes.
So where'd you go to?
I went to Nyack Boys School in Nyack, New York, and then I went to Blair Academy in New Jersey, Blairstown, New Jersey.
And the reason that you went to boarding school is that your father was traveling back and forth to Iran all the time.
Yeah, yeah. My father traveled a lot, and sometimes my mother would go with him to Iran, and also I think my father felt when we arrived here, though he's never said this, his wife was very young with 3 young children, and it was sort of too much for her. So he sent the boys off to boarding school.
You graduated high school. How'd you end up at Yale?
I ended up at Yale because I did well in high school, and actually many people from this particular from Blair Academy went to Yale.
Now, I mean, when you were growing up, did you ever think that you were going to be?
I'll tell you a funny story though. When I got into Yale, at that time I was very excited about going to Yale, and I called my parents, who both happened to be in Tehran at the time. I called them up. I said, you know, Dad, I got into Yale, and the connection wasn't that well. And he said to me, "Get a lawyer right away. Get a lawyer right away."
He thought you got into jail.
Exactly.
Now, the interesting thing was, when you were growing up, did you think you were going to be like your dad, be an importer and exporter?
No, I didn't, because though his main business was importing and exporting and industrial activities in Iran, he was a sort of compulsive speculator. And so when he was in the U.S., he would buy property in the U.S.
Our joke when we got together is that, in essence, your father was like a deal junkie.
Yes.
And you know, and it's very interesting, and I wasn't, but we can bring it up now, that your dad really, and this is when people wouldn't even realize there was a 2nd Avenue L and a 3rd Avenue L. And your dad said to you once, if I buy land in Tehran for $12 a foot, and I can buy land in New York City for $6 a foot, I got to buy land in New York City.
Yeah, that was exactly his calculation.
And he acquired lots of vacant land, or land with
Tenement houses.
Tenement housing.
And all up and down Second Avenue and Third Avenue.
Now, when were they developed? When you and the brothers were in business, or before?
No,
that?
way before. These things were developed in the 50s and the 50s, early 60s.
So at that time, your father found local partners,
Yeah.
like Carlisle that we were talking about, and Dimson and other people, and took these properties. He built an office building on one of the properties.
Right.
He built the Regency apartment house. He bought a lot of things. And in reality, with everything else, as you said to me in one of the articles, your father was playing Monopoly, in certain aspects. He was buying land, and then he was building it later on. So you graduate Yale, and then you go to Harvard Law.
Harvard Business School.
Harvard Business School. And at Harvard Business School, as the reason you went to Harvard?
Really, everyone at that time, this was 1966, was trying to avoid the Vietnam War. And at that time, going to graduate school was a deferment.
You finish Harvard, or you're really ready to finish, and then you found the proverbial reserve unit.
Yes.
And you were saying, and it was difficult at that time, as many of us, including yours truly, found the reserve unit. Mine was in It was in Rockaway, Queens, and Fort Tilden. You unfortunately had, as one would say, a big schlep. You had to go to Albany.
Yeah. And I did that for a while.
And you were the crew you were in was a medic group.
Yeah, I was in a field medic.
So what happens now? So you come back over here, and the brothers decide to create like an investment fund for wealthy Persians?
Yes. So when I got out of the Army Reserves, at that time Henry was working for a law firm in New York. And so Henry and I joined up together, and we decided to create an investment fund for wealthy Iranians to invest in all sorts of vehicles, primarily the stock market, publicly traded securities, but we were also going to invest in real estate.
And then what happens? The West Side. The West Side was a little tough in those days in the early 70s.
Yeah, so one of the we were not the operating partners. We had through our accountant introduced us to a guy who was doing renovations of small brownstones on the West Side, which at that time was sort of a booming cottage industry. So we hooked up with this guy. We were the money. He was the brains and the operations. And after a while, we bought a couple buildings with him. And after a while, we realized that he was siphoning off funds. And
now, were you still in the investment business, or was it?
No, we're in the investment business. So.
And the initial investment business, was that called Rockrose?
Yeah.
So the original company, which subsequently became Rockrose, the real estate company, was Rockrose, an investment company.
Right.
That originally came out of because you lived on Rockrose Place.
Right. That was the street that my parents lived at. In fact, we just sold the house, their house, a few weeks ago.
Now what happens is you then go in and you really get to your first building. Timing is everything. It may have not been the best time. On 16th Street, right?
Right. This is like, by the time we split up the business with our partner, what we did was we got certain buildings and he got certain buildings. And one of the buildings we got was on 16th Street, which is quite a nice block between 5th and 6th. And at that time, the brownstone co-op business was a new business, and people were doing that. So that's what we did. We decided to convert this building into a co-op, and which is what we did. When we finished the building, it was like 1970 or 71.
Not the best time.
No, there was no market. The market was completely dead. So what we did was, actually we'd sold 2 units. It was a 6-unit building. We sold 2 units. We put our office in the ground floor. I moved into one apartment, and Henry moved into another apartment. And then when Fred got out of college and he joined us at Rockrose, he moved into the other apartment. So we had the place occupied essentially by ourselves.
Now, something that
And
you
waited. And as is true in real estate, if you wait long enough, you're okay. And then we ended up selling the units down the line for a lot of money.
Now, then you even went to one of the haunting areas where your father had done business. You went to 2nd Avenue, and you found this printing shop in Turtle Bay. What happened over there?
That was a large building, about 500,000 square feet, 30 stories. It had an explosion in it. I don't know if you remember, because a lot of I remember. I heard the explosion. At that time, I was uptown. I was up on 63rd Street and 2nd Avenue. I remember at 5 o'clock in the morning being shaken up in bed, thinking that either it was a thunderstorm or a bomb somewhere. What happened was there was a gas leak in the building. The Brouses owned the building. Brouse, Lou File, and a few other big shots at that time. There was like a 6-inch gas line that came into the building that fed the whole printing industry upstairs. One of the printers had put some machinery directly under this gas line. The machine blew up. It ruptured the gas, and for 4 or 5 hours, out of a 6-inch gas line, the whole building filled up with gas. There were in the building about 12 elevators. The gas went into the elevator shafts, filled up the elevator shafts, and then at 5 o'clock in the morning, when the first porter came in and hit the button to call for the elevator, the mixture was exactly the right mixture, and that ignited the gas. Big explosion, blew out all the elevators and the western side of the building. It was a huge thing.
And that you converted into residential?
Yeah, and we converted that into residential. People said that couldn't be done, that it was this foolish endeavor.
But then you also went to the west side, the archive.
Yeah.
And tell me about that.
That was a federal building owned by the federal government, and they were disposing of it. It was the original customs house in New York City, because at that time the waterfront ended on Washington Street. You know, everything from Washington Street inward, is now landfill. So ships would pull up there, they'd assess it, whatever. The federal government, through the Landmarks Conservancy, made a deal with David Teitelbaum to renovate the building. David Teitelbaum, I don't know if you remember him, he did demolition, but not much further, and then we bought it from David.
Now, as I was saying at the introduction, you guys were the visionary. You went to Battery Park City. I mean, when Battery Park City had nothing.
Yeah.
You just had the 2 left-rack buildings, which looked basically more like subsidized housing.
Yeah.
You went in and you built 333
Rector Place.
Rector Place. What was that like?
That was one of the first new buildings we built. We were awarded that site, which is actually 2 sites, in an RFP, and at that time, Battery Park City had awarded maybe about another 7 or 8 other sites, and the idea was everyone would build together. And the other builders were significant people at that time: Milstein,
So here's the question. You then go, you guys were more into residential renovations. Yeah. Then you built Rector Street. And then, someone said Carnegie Hall is great. How do you find this site to build this magnificent building called Carnegie Hill Tower?
We love the site. And we were originally going to build it as a mixed-use office building, office base, and apartment house above, similar to Macklow, and also right behind the City Spire. Right. That was sort of a known business method. And then we looked at those, and we were very expert in the residential portion.
That's
of the
right.
business.
And this was your first office.
Yeah, it was our first office building. Then we started studying these other buildings, and we found it's a curious thing. You know, this hybrid building, it really doesn't work out that well because the elevator core for the apartment house really disrupts the. So you end up with something that's neither fish nor fowl. The office space is really not good office space. So we decided to make the whole thing an office building.
Now, another area that you were involved
In one of the worst times, we started it in a great time. We started it in like '87, and then the whole world blew up.
Now, also talking about a bad time, but you were really involved, and you got involved even meeting with the Rockefellers. In the 90s, Lower Manhattan was, nobody wanted to move to Lower Manhattan. There were a lot of vacant buildings. You know, fortunately, Giuliani listened to people like you and others, and you started taking over office buildings and converting them to rental, like 45 Wall,
Right.
which was what happened over there.
Well, 45 Wall was the first building, first large-scale building that was renovated under the Giuliani's Lower Manhattan plan. The conventional wisdom was that this wouldn't work. The too much interior space, not enough windows, dark corridors, and no one's going to want to live downtown. So the buildings were very cheap. So we bought that building and a couple other buildings for very little money, maybe $10 a foot.
But you were saying you had to meet with certain of these people, the Rockefellers
Yeah,
and other people,
well,
to get the administration to even do something
Right.
about changing the tax law, because if you didn't have the tax abatements, you couldn't have
You
built
couldn't do it.
even with the low price of the property.
I always loved the buildings downtown architecturally, and because the architecture downtown was really spectacular, and always wanted to get involved down there. The Downtown Lower Manhattan Association, a very old line group of people, very vested in downtown, Rockefellers, Chase Bank,
Mellon, Bank of America.
law firms. A lot of those law firms have always been downtown. Got together, and they've been active downtown for a long time, and they were advising the mayor to create a program to take this excess Class B office stock off the market. And they were effective. They had me down there. I advised them that they had to implement this 421G, which is the equivalent of 421A for
Right,
renovation.
which was the tax abatement.
Tax
now,
abatement.
we talk about visionary, it was Queens, and we were joking on many of our shows that you and your brothers were living in Queens, and you were going into the city and taking the car into the city, and you see this industrial area in Long Island City, and then you have something today called East Coast. Tell me about that, where the Pepsi sign is, and it's magnificent.
Yeah, I was always aware of it. I always wondered why that waterfront was so underutilized, and we had an opportunity. Pepsi owned 22 acres. The Port Authority had instituted the Queens West Plan 15 years before they did anything there. This was a deal that they made in return for developing in Hoboken, which was the New Jersey side of the Port Authority. The bone they were throwing in New York was to develop the waterfront at Queens West. Now Hoboken really took off, and they actually invested a lot of money. Queens West, the Port Authority invested very little, and very little actually happened.
So what happened? How did you decide? I mean, it was great, great waterfront.
Yeah.
But there was nothing there.
There was nothing there.
The only thing that was there was the property
Lights.
that City Lights in 1998.
Yeah.
So what happened?
What happened is Pepsi wanted to sell, Quiddick wanted to buy. Quiddick, funded by the Port Authority, didn't want to put up the money to buy, so they needed to bring in a developer. And there was tremendous environmental risk. So we
Wasn't the Esso tanks over there?
Yeah, they had prior to Pepsi, Exxon had an oil refinery there. So you can imagine how much oil.
So part of the job was to move the Pepsi sign, right?
Yeah.
And how many buildings have you put up so far?
So far, we put up 3 buildings, about 1,200 apartments. We now are in the ground in construction with another 3 buildings, about 1,800 apartments.
And you're also the creation of a park
Yeah,
and a public school?
public school, yes. Started also a library, putting in a library.
And some subsidized retail so that
Yeah.
the community could have that. So, you take markets, there was a market, everybody's talking today about it, the Hudson Yards and so on, but the Elghanayans were there before. What happened, when did you start looking at property on the far west side in the 30s, like 37th Street, where you have 2 buildings today?
About 10 years ago, we started assembling sites on the far west side prior to the Hudson Yards rezoning. We had no idea that this zoning was going to happen. And we'd just been buying industrial properties and we put together 3 very large sites. And then the rezoning came in, and then we were the first people to build in the Hudson Yards rezoned area.
And what have you built there so far? You built 2 buildings so far, right?
We built 2 buildings. One building is 450 apartments on the east side of 10th Avenue and 37th. And on the west side, we built a very large building, about 850 apartments, which we just finished.
Now, everybody loves Whole Foods,
Yeah.
but you brought the first Whole Foods here.
Yes. And the Chelsea Mercantile. Whole Foods was very reluctant to come to New York. They were very afraid of New York. We brought them here, and they were wildly successful right from the beginning. Then now, I don't know, there's maybe 4 or 5 Whole Foods in New York City. They love it.
Now,
And a lot of imitators, too.
And in addition to the conversions in the buildings in Lower Manhattan, you went in and you even built apartment houses in Lower Manhattan.
Yeah.
2 Gold Street.
2 Gold Street, a large building. We built 201 Pearl Street. We built 15 Cliff Street. So we built quite a few buildings. 2 Gold Street is the premier downtown building for young people.
Right. Now, then you also went into the acquisition. How did you decide to go into Washington, D.C.?
Washington, D.C., this was after 9/11. We were very badly hurt by 9/11 because we had so much inventory downtown, not only in Battery Park City, but downtown itself, and we had a couple office buildings down there too. And 9/11 really just knocked us out. We had to vacate the whole area. It was very traumatic for us. And at that time, we decided we had to diversify our portfolio outside of New York, and we picked Washington primarily because it was close to New York and sort of felt like New York.
With 30 seconds left, let's talk about your family. You're married today?
Yes.
Your wife's name?
My wife, Madeline.
Madeline.
She's a real estate broker.
Right. And you have how many children?
I have 2 children. I have a daughter who's 35 and has 2 children, so I'm a grandfather.
And the names of the grandchildren?
Are Olivia and Jackson. They're 4 and 1.
And then you also...
I have Jeremy, her husband, works for me, who's a terrific guy.
So, Tom, I think your brother Fred, your brother Henry, I think the Elghanayans, from, your dad, who came over here and said, it's cheaper to buy property over here, has done a lot, and I'd like to thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.